So maybe that's what they mean when they say prompting is going away. That it's going to be more conversational and not like a scripting technique, which is pretty
No,
much what it is now.
I think it's way wilder than that. Hey, welcome to AI Expressed. This is a podcast kind of style discussion. I'm Ed, this is Alex, and we're just going to take some time to kind of expand on topics that we run into on a daily basis where, the pace of AI is so fast, we don't really get time to dive deep into these different topics. So it's just kind of an open discussion about general AI themes. Each podcast will have a specific theme.
Yes, exactly. It's basically just an excuse for me and Ed to chat about AI, which we always want to do, but we never find a legitimate time to do it. So
yeah, we're going to really dive into different things. So it'll be talking about the latest news, AI technology trends. We'll discuss kind of ethical considerations with AI, how this is impacting our culture, our society. We'll dive into philosophical questions, where AI is going. What does the technology look like 5, 10, 100 years from now? We'll just nerd out. We're both really huge AI enthusiasts. It dominates our life right now. So we have a lot of interesting thoughts about it.
And we will not abstain from uncomfortable topics, the very more controversial ethical questions.
Definitely. And we both have very different opinions, so it's usually an interesting discussion. Just sort of some background, I work for Diffusion, which is a service that provides a creative suite of AI apps. So we work very heavily with the open source community. We have a lot of different apps right now. I think we have 10 more on the way. They're mostly centered around image and text generation. So I'm relatively new to AI. I started in this last year, but I've definitely been following it. And my background is a video artist as well as musical producer. So I've kind of had that creative sort of edge to what I do with AI. Alex?
Yeah, it's interesting because I come from video editing, video production world as well. And I shifted into AI pretty heavily recently too. And myself, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to AI. I do AI education, I do podcasting, a bit of journalism online, and also a lot of researching, not only for myself, but freelancing for some startups, where I help them to understand how to overcome some challenges when it comes to AI.
Yeah, you've got a very varied skill set. I mean, you've done model trainings, you've done Discord bots and language model work.
Exactly. So both Stable Diffusion and LLMs.
So we've got very different ways of prompting. We'll go into it, and let's kick things off. I think prompting really started in the language model space, particularly I think in 2015. One of the most revolutionary pieces was this paper came out, "Attention is All You Need," which sort of kickstarted this prompting revolution. And of course, the introduction of Stable Diffusion, really helped define that for the image space, as well as other things like DALLE and so forth. I think that prompting is sort of in a funny place right now in our development as a society using AI. We've got all kinds of tools, all kinds of models. They all use prompts in a slightly different way. And so it can be really tricky to, know what prompt works where, what's the best way to use things. We'll talk a little bit about using prompting for language models, but our experience is really in Stable Diffusion and image generation. So we've got a lot of opinions there. Let's just start things off with talking about prompting. Alex, would you say prompting at the moment is something that is undervalued or not, used properly by the majority of people out there doing, image generation, let's say?
I guess when it comes to the conversation in the Stable Diffusion world is very much focused on interfaces, plugins, advancements in the technology. but not in the very fundamentals of the tool itself, which is prompting, because you basically cannot do anything without prompting in Stable Diffusion. There are now some exceptions, but in general, prompting is always needed to get you started with Stable Diffusion. It's the first thing you learn when you approach Stable Diffusion. You learn that when you prompt something, you're gonna get a specific kind of image, and by refining your skills in prompting, you also refine your skills in Stable Diffusion over time, because you understand how your prompting interacts with every other aspect of automatic or Conf UI or any other interface you're using. And as you said, each tool has a different approach with prompting. Like when you use a prompt and you might use it in another GUI or another like cloud tool, it might not yield the same results it does in another tool. And also there's just like tools that maybe have like a basic prompting, but also have automated AI tools to improve on your own prompting. So there's like a lot of implications and like branches of prompting, like it can be, I guess the one that everyone knows and everyone is used to is the one in Automatic 11.11, which is pretty much where everyone started, at least in the Stable Diffusion realm. And then you can go from there to the one, for example,
Midjourney. Midjourney has a very different prompting style, right? It's like it is really different per platform and then also per model. Yeah, it's funny looking back at like where we came from to where we're going. I think that there's sort of community intelligence that happens where people who are sharing their prompts with one another are learning new tricks, learning new prompts and words to use in their prompts. And so just like the AI is advancing, our humanity is advancing in our learning of how to use AI in sort of the same way, using this sort of collective intelligence to kind of unlock these secrets in these models.
Now that I think about it, there's a bit of a gray area when you say prompting, because some people consider prompting the whole workflow, but some other think the prompting is just like the way you describe the subject of your like your positive and negative. But all of these interfaces, what they do is just like they're like a Python UI. And so the product of whatever you do in this interface is always a textual prompt. It's not that you click a button and something weird happens. It's just all text, all the inputs, even if there are buttons in the UI, they're just text inputs that go to like the Python interpreter, and they're interpreted. And a lot of these modern GUIs for Stable Diffusion, they're capable of like returning the prompt as a whole, which means like including all the settings and all the sliders in textual form. So what do you think, like, what's the right way to talk about prompting, like as the entire workflow or just the subject description?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways to talk about it. It's a very, very like wild and wonderful thing. And of course, once you get into the Python interpreter, like you're talking about, what happens then? It all turns into math anyways, right?
Yeah.
So it's all numbers and math. I can't help but think of this really funny parable, or not a parable, but just like a story of I think it's like Chinese or Indian old story of these wise men. So this really relates to prompting to me, where there's these blind men, and they're all brought by the king in front of an elephant, and they're told to describe what it is. And so the blind men go and they feel this elephant, and one is standing by the leg, and he feels the leg and goes like, "Oh, this is a tree. This is clearly a tree. It's a strong trunk, of a tree, and it is very tall and strong and stable tree." And then the other one's, by the trunk of the elephant, and he's like, it's like whirling around and stuff. He's like, "Oh, this is a snake. Like, this is scary. Like, wasn't prepared for a snake. Hopefully, it's not harmful." And they don't have the full picture of the elephant. And when you're prompting, a lot of the times that's what's going on. We don't know the math. We don't know, there's
weights,
the map.
yeah.
the weights. There's also like how it's interpreted and what kind of tricks go on behind the magic curtain in the application itself to your prompt.
Yeah, and each model has a different response to your prompt. You know,
Yeah.
you might be using
Yeah.
the same interface but with different models. I mean, we can always rely on the fact that most models we use Stable Diffusion, you know, vanilla Stable Diffusion as base. So even when we use a more you know, refined and custom model, we can hope that like what we learn when it comes to the base model applies to the different iterations of the model.
Yeah.
So that can be a constant, I guess.
Yeah. You know, I think by piecing it together, all these different like collective intelligence discussions, people sharing, that openness that I've seen in the AI space does help, because the blind men talk together, then they figure out that it's an elephant, right?
Yeah.
But if we're all looking at it in silos, it's really hard to figure out. With the base model and just looking at that, like I remember I found a creator like a while ago. I think it was Emperor of Antarctica, something like this, and he was like incredible artist. Like he was getting the most wild results with like just incredible results at Stable Diffusion. I messaged him and I was like, how did you do this? Like, what are you using? What's your technology? What's your, you know? And he was just like, oh, it's just the base model. And there's so much in it. Like you could endlessly traverse the base model and find incredible things.
Exactly. When someone sees like a nice image, they think, oh my God, this must be like some new model that I haven't used. But actually, like if you just, I say it for experience because I sat down with some models and I did like spend a lot of time to understand how they reacted with the prompt and how they were like reading the prompt and, you know, understanding it. And that yielded some results that people who were using the same model could just not believe. You know, they were like, this is not the same model, right? Like you're using something else, but actually it was just the same model with just a bit more patience with prompting itself. And that's why I think prompting is undervalued, because a lot of people are chasing this perfect model, being blind to actually what they can do by themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the trained model sort of like surfaces and makes things easier to grasp. Like it makes it easier to get that trained model result. Because when you're training a model, right, you're stuffing it with the tokens that you want, or you're replacing tokens that are in there. So then it becomes easier to access those tokens in the diffusion model that you want to get the result you need. So that's the advantage of training. But in the language model space, you know, there's this discussion that goes on all the time, which is like, why would I train something? If you think about it in the language model space, like it's so much harder to train a full model than it is in the stable diffusion space, where you just fine tune something and it, you know, takes a few hours and you get a cool result and away you go. You got a good data set. But in the language model space, like the data set has to be so much more precise. You need so much more processing power. It takes so much longer. So for them, it's like a much higher cost to train something. And so the way that the language models use prompts is much different, right? There's like instructions which you can use. You can really put in a lot more information. You get better context because it's not looking at this image. With images, you can be kind of fuzzy. Like the image itself is like artistic, so there's lots of room for error. But when you're looking at words, like it has to be spelled correctly, it has to have grammar, it has to have, you know, correct formatting and data. So in the language model space, they really try to reduce the amount of times that they're training things, because they're focused on, okay, can I just get access to what I want with the prompt? If no, can I have the language model do what is it called? RAG, Retrieval Augmented Guidance, I think that's what it's called. Better double check that one. Retrieval Augmented Generation. So that is where there's a database and the language model is grabbing from the database and retrieving that information. Because if you can do that, you may not need to fine tune a model if it can just access a database that has the current information it needs. And we don't have that in stable diffusion, right? So it's so much easier to train. So that's why you get all these people who are just leaning on trained images or trained models to get the results they want.
Do you think that the difference in complexity in training a model is because most models in Stable Diffusion are derivative models of a base model that is very well trained, whilst in LLM space, when you train a model, you do it from scratch, from a new data set, and like the merging and mixing or LoRa space is not yet developed as it is for Stable Diffusion.
I think it's primarily the difficulty with the language model stuff is that it's an order of magnitude more complicated in just number of parameters. So if you look at like the number of parameters in a stable diffusion model versus a 7 billion, 13 billion, it's quite a bit higher. Um, I'm not able to recall from memory what 1.5 is. Maybe we can put it on the bottom of the screen there. Number of parameters, but yeah, it's that is primarily where the difficulty is.
I feel like complexity is definitely a part of it, but also I think we were discussing about this in private, that the tooling to do some of the things that you can do in Stable Diffusion easily is still just not there yet. Like merging models or easily creating LoRa's based on a fine tune on a fine tuning data sets are tools that are like they exist, but they're still pretty much like only Python coding tools or libraries, whilst in Stable Diffusion, all of this merging and LoRa creation and fine-tuning creation tools are GUIs that are pretty accessible to a wider public. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not saying that this is
yeah.
the only reason, but I think it's a big part.
Well, yeah, that. I feel like that's a different area of discussion, is like the overlaps in technology between stable diffusion and language models, because there is a lot, like the LoRa technology, for example, which started in language models and then was adapted for stable diffusion. I think there is a lot of synergy there. I just looked it up, and it's 1 billion parameters in stable diffusion. Um, when you're looking at, for example, 7 billion for a small model, and Stability just released a 3 billion model for language models that can operate on a mobile phone.
Oh yeah, but the difference is crazy, because I'm just reading now that speculation is that ChatGPT is like GPT-4 is 1.2 trillion parameters. So the size, if the
Yeah.
numbers are correct, is like staggeringly different.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
even
so
like, and even if you listen to the speculation that says that GPT-4 is just split into 8 smaller model, each one of these smaller models by itself is speculated to be 220 billion parameters. So it's still like 200 times more than Stable Diffusion.
Yeah, so this is the 1 billion number that I pulled out of there. It is for 1.5, and it's 860 million parameters of UNet and 123 million in the text encoder.
Why? Like you would think intuitively that image making is more complex, right, than text.
But it doesn't have to be as accurate.
Yeah.
It can be much more
Oh,
vague.
that's true, right? Yeah, that's true.
And the other thing is, because it's so small, it really was adapted quite quickly by consumer GPUs, and we saw really transformative kind of technology come out, like Xformers, which made it much more accessible to lower VRAM cards, so that it was able to kind of spread like wildfire. That's I think the struggle with the language model side right now is, it's really hard to fit it onto like consumer cards, like really effective models. If you want to use like a 30 billion parameter, it's kind of out of reach of most consumer cards. So yeah, the interesting thing to me is, looking at these models is, you've got this like text encoder, right? So in the stable diffusion, you've got a text encoder that's responsible for interpreting that prompt, turning it into math, which is then accessed by these tokens in the UNet, which gives you the image. And the prompting kind of sits in that area of working with the text encoder. So with Stability, it's been really interesting seeing how, since they've been launching these different models, how they've adapted to kind of the community and how the community is prompting. So to start off with, in 1.5, Runway released 1.5 with this, a clip text encoder, VITL14, if you want to get specific, and it was quite accessible, quite usable, and that's what made Stable Diffusion take off. in 2.1, Stability released more parameters, you'd think better, but they switched the text encoder. And
All right.
when the text encoder changed, it was a different clip model. I think it moved to like open clip or something like that. And that caused prompting to totally change. And this is where negative prompting started to come in, and people started using it a lot more heavily. And the prompting was just much different from 1.5. A great example of this that I can think of is like, everything when you write it in gets split into little tokens that turns into the math that is used by the text encoder. And
it's this text encoder change happened again with Excel, or it was just like
yes,
a one?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So it happened. It happened again, but it's kind of funny what happened there. So one funny thing in Stable Diffusion, I don't know if you've seen this, is verbs. Like if you use a verb, it is very interesting what comes out the other side. So like, let's say for example, we have mechanic holding a wrench. In 1.5, you'd kind of get a guy holding a wrench or a mechanic holding a wrench. In 2.1, you might get a mechanic and a wrench, but you wouldn't necessarily get the verb in the thing. It was too strict. Yeah.
Even still in Excel, what matters the most is always the scripted word, like, and not actions or states of minds or feelings. They can do something, but they don't have the same effect as like just describing something like a blue sky or a red apple. Like something that is very descriptive always have a much bigger effect on the end result than saying something like a sad person.
Yeah, those modifiers are definitely stronger. So with SDXL, the community had kind of rebelled against 2.1. One, because it was censored. They took the Lion data set and just took everything that was nude, not safe for work, got rid of it. And with 1.5, but you also lost the text encoder of 1.5. So they basically said, all right, we're not going to make it nude. That's like Stability draws a line. So like, you guys train what you want in here. But what we're going to do is we'll put in both text encoders. So they have both models of text encoder in there, which means that like it's completely wild. It's like now you've got two, and I kind of feel like it's not better than either of them. Like it's like it kind of takes some of each, but it also takes some of the downsides of each. And so SDXL brought in a lot of complexity while trying to simplify prompting. So what's interesting about SDXL, you can do very simple prompts, you can get great results. And a lot of the stuff that worked in 1.5 where you get great results now doesn't, right? Like overly complicated prompting doesn't work as well. And
Have they
yeah.
merged the encoders, or you can still, like, for example, in Confi UI, you would be able to choose which one you want to use?
Well, it's funny because when Stability released this, they didn't provide much guidance. Like they were working on it, and there was like people in the community trying to figure it out, but they sort of didn't know what was going on. So they were like, I don't know, like let's figure this out together, which was sort of a weird thing. But I saw, like, for example, I was in watching this development happen live with SD Next, with Comfy UI, people making their own workflows. You kind of seen it in the development of Automatic 1111. Everyone struggled to implement this right away just because there wasn't much guidance on how it works with, to be fair, with all these like open source tech that Stability didn't manage or use necessarily. So there was just like an interesting period of a few months where it was like a sprint to like publicly put it together and get it working. And the Comfy piece was definitely ahead of everyone. So Comfy was like in the front of the pack because of their node-based architecture. They basically split out their workflow, and the community was able to like create their own nodes and really quickly map things. And then they had the two text encoders separated so that you could prompt them. And people were like theorizing, like, oh, use one for style, use one for subject, or try to use them in different ways. But it's still not clear what the best practices necessarily
Yeah,
for using those two
different
text
encoders.
boxes, yeah, which are called like VIT-T or VIT-L or something like that. You know, the automatic 1111 and SD Next sort of like merged them into a single prompt input,
Yeah,
like
it's
people were
something
used to.
you
But
cannot customize on automatic. It's just baked
I
in.
think there's a setting. I'd have to double check that though. But yeah, it's it's strange. It was a strange rollout, but it's been cool to see people figure stuff out with this. But I think that with the text encoder piece, it's like you definitely are like, there's got to be a better way to do this, and we have seen it with DALLE-3. You
Yeah.
know, we've seen the advancement there.
Yeah, in my prompting with Excel, I have to say that I have been satisfied with how it works. I mostly use 1.5, and I didn't even touch 2.1 much because just didn't like the models that were floating around. And jumping from 1.5 to Excel prompting, I didn't feel like a massive, difference. If anything, yes, as you said, prompting is simpler and you can get to a better result with less words. Kind of like how it works in Midjourney, right? Like in Midjourney, the simpler you stay with your prompting, the more you can kind of expect a decent result, and the more you bloat your prompt, especially of unrelated stuff, the less the image is like satisfactory. So in my experience, at least, I didn't notice anything negative in new prompting in Excel. If anything, I liked it. Maybe if I tried 2.1, I would have a different opinion. Did you ever like 2.1 for prompting?
I did use 2.1 a bit because it was much better at like photographic styles than 1.5, but it just suffered because you know, the flexibility in the text encoder wasn't there. So it was able to like produce photographic styles quite well. My issue with SDXL is, yes, you can get great stuff out of it, but the model itself is really over and under trained in certain areas. And the way I've kind of described this is, if you think of this trained information, there's a text encoder, there's the UNet information, like the image math, basically. And in that image math, there's sort of, if you've got an XYZ grid, imagine in your mind with all these different points on it of these different like tokens, these different words that are describing things. There's sort of like territories. There's like three-dimensional blobs on this graph colored differently. And a good example of this is the illustration token. You look at the illustration token in SDXL, there's this very prominent Illustrator style. I don't know what it is. It was in the Stability Discord when they were doing the Discord generation bot. I saw it a lot. And it's kind of like an orangey line art, digital art kind of style. And it's just really overtrained. So like if you try to bring in, like fine tune the little elements of your prompt to bring in like different illustrative styles, this area is so overtrained that if you just have illustration in there, it will just dominate everything that comes out of it. So I really like to use those styles. Yeah.
So we're talking about is a visualization of the weights that they published.
Yeah.
I've never seen that. That's interesting.
Oh no,
actually.
it's just published up here.
Oh, okay.
I just like to see it this way because I think of that space as like a
No,
world,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, I think it pretty much a good way to visualize it is like, have you ever seen one of those like time space graphs with like,
Yeah.
Like when you illustrate gravity, I guess, you see like this kind of net, and then you see something like pulling the net more down than another planet.
Yep.
I
Hills
think
and valleys and
yeah.
I like to think of it as an actual like world that I'm exploring. So when I'm looking at a new model, I'm like kind of exploring this new world and finding these territories and mapping them out. So like, for example, the illustration style, to me, it's like kind of like a desert. Like there's just, or maybe a mountain. It's just like, it's barren. There's like because it's not very flexible, to me, like flexibility is life, is growth, is like those are like fertile areas, where it's this barren areas are not very fertile because the illustration token just dominates that area so heavily that it's really hard to get your prompt to flourish in that environment. The opposite of that is undertrained areas. So there's a lot of, for example, I think this was maybe deliberate. SDXL, there's a group called Parrot Zone, and they went with SDXL, and they did this for 1.5 as well. They went and mapped all the artist styles that have an impact on the prompt. So they did every single artist that they could, test in SDXL to get a response from.
I've seen
And what they
I've seen
found,
that on GitHub.
yeah, they found that there's all these artists that are out trained in there, but when you prompt them and you see the examples, the backgrounds are all very undertrained. There's just like lots of glitches, deformed stuff, and like unclear, unspecific, which is all, to me, like training Dream Boost styles. You kind of see this sort of like mess that happens in a stable diffusion model before it understands what a concept is. It's like it's very like unclear mix mash of amalgam of all this like weird crud. And that's what you kind of see in these areas, is it's like very undertrained. So if you bring those tokens in, you start to get that crud in your image, which I think was a deliberate decision on their part, maybe because they didn't want to train in all these artist names, for example.
Yeah, it's fascinating how like both, as you say, both overtraining and undertraining can affect the end product, because overtraining can steer the end image too far away from what you wanted because the model is biased, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also undertraining can steer the image away from what you want because the model doesn't have any idea what you want to produce, right? And it's something I never thought about before, that both like overtraining and undertraining can have negative effects on the image. But that's, I guess, why then you want to step into training your own stuff, because then you can
I think that's what Stability wanted, is they kind of said like, hey, we want to work with businesses, and lots of artists are upset that their work is being stolen. We don't want to touch that. Like, if you want to bring an artist in, you have to train it. But we'll get the broader picture of just artists in general. So I think that's kind of what happened, is they sort of like, they had a bunch of images that were probably captioned as artists, but they didn't want to like really say like, we're going to capture this specific person. They're just like, we're just going to capture the work of all these different artists, which is totally fair. I think with SDXL as well, they had like an opt-out list too, right? So you could, if you were an artist, you could be like, I don't want my art in the model, and they'd say, great, you're off the list. Or if you wanted to have your art in there, you could say, opt in, yes, please train on my illustration style.
Have you ever seen that like on a lot of art hosting websites like ArtStation or DeviantArt? Now you have an option to say, I don't want my art to be used in the training of an AI model. Do you think that actually works? It's actually something that is respected or applied, or is just like...
It may be... I think like individual companies are having to say whether or not they're using information to be trained, which is good. However, the tool set and dank persistence of people who are making this thing, so like they will rip anything that's visible off. I mean, it's just sort of the nature of it, is they will take they can see what is public information, and then use it to train models with.
Yeah. So I guess it's more for internal purposes, because a lot of these companies eventually they will want to monetize their own data, and they just do it to know if like their users are okay or not. But it doesn't have real implications on how external, parties can just come to the website, scrape it, and use it in their model.
Yeah, I think a really like kind of negative example of this is Firefly, where they changed their terms of service. So they took their stock stuff and said, "Oh, by the way, now you're allowed to train a model, or we're allowed to train a model on your art that you've put into this stock website," which is it's their library, I guess, and they're paying the users for it. But it was kind of like that unexpected change
But the
in that
more
they allowed the training all of a sudden.
the more crazy example, I guess, is Copilot, because Copilot is just trained on the
Mm,
entirety of GitHub,
yeah.
and any snippet of code you post on GitHub, it will be used in the training of Copilot.
Yeah, I saw some crazy stuff. Like people were like, personal information is getting put out in prompts, and like, whoa, you know. So let's just talk like briefly about using that information. You know, I think that there's some laws in Europe that basically say, and I think Germany's leading on this one, but they basically say, you know, whatever is public can be used for training. Sort of the same way like an artist uh, who is inspired by, like, let's say a certain anime artist or whatever, will draw in that style and eventually incorporate it. And then later on, you know, they'll get enough creativity and artistic experience to like develop their own style, but it still might have that little influence of that like first few artists that they really loved and adored and copied.
Yeah.
So they say, you know, AI can just kind of learn all that stuff. Um, that's the law in these countries. Which, you know, I think that if we're stewards of this AI, and we want it to learn who we are and what we're doing, like, yes, that makes sense. But there is, of course, people whose livelihood is on it, and that's when it gets a little difficult. Knowing that, you know, people who have invested their whole lives in learning an art now are threatened by the ability for someone to go on to, let's say, DALLE-3, for
Yeah.
example, and just get something in that style instantly.
Well, I think the legal landscape is ever evolving, and at some point there might be very restrictive laws about this, but I think it won't make a difference, because at that point, just like training the artist you want to use will be so easy that whatever guardrail is there to stop you in doing that will be so trivial
Hmm.
that, you know, this like let's say Stable Diffusion puts massive guardrails in the use of artists that have their work like protected or copyrighted. At that point, you can just like, there would be tools online to just download libraries of images to quickly train on by yourself the model or the LoRa you need to achieve that style and quickly reproduce it. You know, maybe there will not be websites on the ClearNet. Maybe it will be torrents. You will find torrents with like a massive data set to use, ready to use, and just like in a few minutes train it on your computer and have DALL-E DALL-E style painting done perfectly. So I
Yeah.
think it's fair and ethically it's what it should be, that artists should be protected. But you know, it's like trying to stop piracy, right?
A little bit. I think there's a lot of interesting parallels through history that we've had. You know, I think of like hip hop sampling, right? Where it's like, you know, with hip hop, they would take these old funk records, these old soul records, and then they'd, you know, sample a few seconds of it, turn it into a beat, remix it, flip it. So on the one hand, as a musician, I can identify with that. I'm like, yeah, I want to scour the archives of the libraries and the thrift stores and get all this like crazy stuff and incorporate it into my art. Um, but on the other hand, it is definitely impacting people's lives, and that has to be considered. You know, an example of this was I was having a discussion with a university professor, and you know, they were quite upset about AI because um, not only are these hallucinations, right, that are, you know, misinterpreting information and putting in fake information out there about people, but in Canada, royalties for academic papers have been under attack. So previous government rolled back, and a lot of the um, lucrative royalties that were there for, you know, academic thinkers. And so now they're seeing this as just another attack on royalties, and like, you know, these AI models aren't paying royalties. So that is something where it's like, okay, um, there's a clash of culture here of like the way we've been doing things as a society, the way we want to do things now with AI, and we want to give access to all these people, freedom of information. There's this new movement in the younger generation of like access and information and transparency, but it's clashing with this like sort of older way of doing things. And this is something where like the forces of capitalism and bureaucracy are working against those people that otherwise would be protected, like artists, like creatives, like writers. And these are all the things that make us human.
Yeah.
These artists and creators are what we value, maybe not as much as we should. I think that there's a lot of value placed on like business, achievement, success, money, that the literature, the arts, gets put to the side already. And now we got AI doing it, and it's just like, that is this the nail in the coffin? Or as a society, are we going to like kind of wake up and say like, hey, we need to encourage this, or we need to like help these people? That seems to be the question for our governments.
Yeah, I might have sounded apocalyptic before when I talked about the law landscape and how people can pirate will be easily able to pirate and make new models on their own. But what I see in the startup world, I see the startups I collaborate with, when they go and create a new model, they're very conscious and very fair with the rights of the content they want to use to train models. And so that makes me in turn optimistic about how the landscape when it comes to protecting artist rights will evolve. Because at the end of the day, yeah, there can be pirates who quickly make their own models, but they will not be able still to use it for commercial purposes, because they will be found out. You cannot publish an AI generated image pretending to be.
Andy Warhol's a great example, because he recently was in court for his work, which was determined to not be transformative. So that's one of the most interesting court cases right now for AI art.
What I was saying is that you as a commercial entity, you cannot get away with this kind of stuff. And so and that's the most important thing, right? That if companies and small businesses they respect this, and I can see that they have like a self-embedded respect. They don't take it for granted. They want to do the right thing. At least the people I've collaborated with so far. I think it reflects where this is going to go, which is like for commercial applications, there will not be stealing. It will be very hard to see this kind of stuff, because this company, rather than taking the risk of stealing, they'd rather like train something of their own based on like a small data set, right? They could just pay an artist to create a style for them, and then train a model on that style to be able to quickly reproduce it and be more flexible and produce more content. And that would cost them less, and it would bring less risk than just like stealing from somewhere else, right? Because that way, if someone comes to them and say, look, you've been stealing from me, they would have proof that they've been doing this work, and they've been training their own stuff, their own data set. And so they would have an incentive in being transparent and open when it comes to training and data sets.
I do want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, which is like you were talking about how it's going to be so easy to train, and it's kind of funny because just recently, I don't know if you saw the new IP adapter workflow where it's like it's called like train without a LoRa. Or LoRa without training is I think what it's called.
Is it style transfer?
It's a comfy UI thing. Yep, using the IP adapter ControlNet model. So it does this style transfer. You put in 6 images and then a prompt, and then it gets you those 6 images style with your prompt. And we're going to see a lot more of that, right? That like sort of like one-shot style transfer sort of thing. I think like Google even had it. And they sort of like step back. They're like, oh, I don't know if we want to release this, right? Because it is controversial. It is going to cause people to be upset. But that is where we are going, is eventually the technology will be there that you will be able to do this. And this is where the technology is going to a really interesting new place, because I've heard these people say like prompting is going to disappear completely. Yeah. right? It's like we don't know what that future looks like necessarily from where we're standing today.
I mean, but the question is, how do you steer the AI in a specific direction without prompting?
Right.
If
And
you,
so,
if you, I think
yeah.
if you remove prompting, what it means is that you are just giving it references, like visual references, instead of
Well,
giving it textual references.
well, maybe. I think this is where the multimodal stuff takes over. Multimodal meaning, you know, an AI model that can do text, it can do video, it can do images, it can do all the things. And we're going to see these like mega multimodal AI
Or
models coming
yeah,
out.
or maybe, and I can show this, maybe it has something to do with the way I saw DALL-E reacting to prompts. Because DALL-E, basically you give it a description and it's not even a prompt. It's just like you normally chat with ChatGPT. You say, I would like to see an image of this. And you don't have to write it in prompt form. You don't have to put dashes, square brackets, or anything. It's just like a simple conversational description of your image.
Yeah.
And then DALL-E itself takes it and transform it into 4 variation of a prompt that it made up by itself, depending on the context of the conversation. So maybe that's what they mean when they say prompting is going away, that it's going to be more conversational and not like a scripting technique, which is pretty much what it is now.
I think it's way wilder than that. I think what they're talking about, like that is where it's going. You're right. Like DALL-E 3 is incredible for its text encoder is like the best text encoder we've seen out there.
I can quickly show it as you keep talking about.
So I think where it's going is there's a couple things that will be in play. I think what you're talking about is right. There's also the voice first kind of revolution that will happen. You know, I think just recently they talked about having these like little necklaces, kind of like in the Black Mirror episode where it records your whole life, right? So you're going to have these like something that is with you, an AI companion that is with you and is like taking all of this that you have. Now, hopefully it stays private and local, or private that you control your data, right?
So you see what it does. And basically you give it like, imagine an 8-headed Hydra where each head is a chatbot. And as you can see, it goes and makes 4 different prompts by itself. And it generates on these prompts. And just to go back to what you were saying about like something, advice that tracks your life all day long. I mean, all that data is text at the end of the day though, you know, so it's still prompting.
But what the difference is it's going to predict what you want a lot better. So right now it like, you know, it's guessing based off of the information you've given it, which is, you know, these like 10 words or so. But what it's missing is the context of who you are.
Okay.
And
so
if you are in there, then it could just be like, here's, you know, we could open it up and it would just be like, here's a creative image that explains how DALL-E 3 works. And you wouldn't have to prompt anything. It would just predict and know what you need because with listening to us here talk, right?
So
and that's context, the revolution.
So the context will not be anymore just like the conversation with ChatGPT, but it will be like your entire life will be context for the image generation.
Yes,
but isn't
that to jump in? You won't have to ask it.
Isn't that a bit like customized advertising online? I mean, it sounds like something like we all want, you know, when they pitch it to you, or you'll get like personalized advertising which like fits your lifestyle, but and like it sounds amazing, but actually in practice it's awful. It's the last thing you would want to be targeted.
What if you controlled this AI and you got to determine how it worked? So everyone would have a customized AI to them. And so you'd be able to say, hey, look, I just want to ask you if I want an image. I don't want you to bust in and just give me an image. You know, or you'd be like, look, you can give me an image, but I need you to like request it beforehand. And then I can acknowledge yes or no. And, you know, like, I think that there's going to be this level of customization that we've never seen before. I mean, I get frustrated daily with UI. I'm sure you do too, right? Like the UI of all these applications we have, there's so many different UIs, there's so many different things.
Yeah.
I talked about this recently on LinkedIn. It's like, I think eventually AI will eat software. they talked about before software is eating everything. That was a classic, what was it, Mark Andreessen post or something like that. I think AI is going to eat everything next. And the like all this stuff that we're used to, spreadsheets, our PowerPoints, it's all going to disappear. We won't have to do that stuff because the AI will be able to do it for us. And if we need a UI, if we need a new app, we'll just prompt it. We'll just ask it. And so prompting will still exist in some form, but
so I don't mean to pry, but like, how then would you work? Let's say you need to make a database for work. You need like an Excel spreadsheet, but you cannot do it on a GUI. How do you how do you go about that? Like, I mean, maybe I don't know, because I cannot imagine like how advanced AI would be. I'm just trying to understand what's the step from, Excel with AI to just like the GUI completely disappearing and just the AI remaining in the workflow.
It'll again use the prediction. Like right now we have it predicting tokens, right?
Yeah.
Is like one way of seeing these language models. Then it's going to start predicting us and what we need. And that scares the bejesus out of everyone, right?
So it will predict the work you need to do and just do it in advance.
Look, we have clients, we have sales, we have accounting, and it would be like, I'm a business software, I'm a business artificial intelligence, actually. I run in and I say like, okay, you don't need any more software. I'm just going to do everything. And then when you say, hey, what are the Q4 sales for North America? It'll pull that information out. And then if you want, you can look and say like, hey, I want that in a spreadsheet, and it will do it, but it knows it. It has all your data. It has everything in there already. And from a creative process, like we're already using AI to do the prompting for us. So for example, here, you're using DALL-E to generate the prompt.
Yeah.
Because AI is better at prompting than we are. Now it's better at the specifics, not the ideas, right? Right now, humans, we dominate on ideas. We are really good at ideas, and AI is not good at ideas.
It knows how the end model behaves, so it knows what words to use to trigger a specific, not a specific result, but a more like tested and interesting result than you do.
And we see this already happening with like there's like a great example of that one's cute. They're all waiting to talk. There's a great example of like Uba Booga, which is a really funny language model. There's an adapter for that, an extension for automatic, which connects to Uba Booga, and then it will pull in a prompt. So you just write a general description of what you want, and then it like enhances, adds, modifies, and formats your prompt so that you get the best result out of the model. And that kind of technology already shows us like the AI is better at using AI than we are.
So what is the technology or the tool that gets the closest to this vision you just illustrated of like something like an AI predicting what you want and do it for you? What's the tool that is the closest to this idea?
I think it's agents.
Oh yeah.
Agents, because agents are basically language models that have been given chain of thought, and then they manage multiple other AI to achieve an objective. They'll do the strategic planning.
And right now agents are just limited because it's just hard to keep them on all the time. But if they could accumulate enough context, then they would be more effective.
And that's the context window that people are running into. It's an issue where they can only fit so much information in at a time. Part of it's related to just the AI model technology and where we're at. In Stable Diffusion, we can only do so many tokens in our prompts, for example. And in these language models, you can only fit so much information before it starts forgetting and just not remembering what it needs to do next. I mean, I think humans have a context window too. I've heard it called the human bandwidth limit, right? We can only have so much information before we start forgetting it. And so what's going to happen is the AI is going to exceed that.
Yeah, some people have bigger or smaller, short-term memories, which affect the way they interact and perceive the world. But I have to say something about prompt, like automated prompting like this, because maybe I'm biased because I come from like a long story of, you know, prompting on Stable Diffusion and really appreciating the art of finding the right words in the right order, you know, and finding the tokens that click the right button in the model. But I personally don't like this style of prompting where you just like this DALL-E style where you just put a description and it's gonna do more work than you asked it to do for you. I feel like I'm losing too much control, and maybe this is like the artist perspective, because I do consider myself in part an artist, I guess, when it comes to Stable Diffusion, like as you do, I guess. And that lack of control, you know, that the fact that the AI is deciding so much for me makes me feel less of an artist if I come and use DALL-E as opposed as, you know, Stable Diffusion, because I'm losing so much control and I'm not sure like how much am I gaining in quality by giving up that control on the AI.
I think that what we as artists like is, you know, just the ability to have that extra little bit of control. There's a really interesting app, for example, called Foocus right now, and it just provides like really great instant results. Same with Midjourney. You know, you use it, you get really great instant results. But you know, as an artist, you're like, yeah, but I don't want to see someone else's art. I want to see my art. And the only way we could do that is by having a human impact on the art that we're creating, where
Yeah.
we're really defining the aesthetic as close to our vision as possible. So as these AI get better, yes, there is a risk that we'll just turn into like, you know, we'll start to consume our art rather than create it, right? But the more functionality we can bring to it, you know, this allows us to curate the experience of interacting with things. So Foocus is beautiful. You can go and try all these different styles, and the technology is adapting. You can mix styles now. And, you know, as they're like training wheels, you know, Automatic 1111 has so much capability, but it's way more than the average person needs. You know, this is why DALLE-3 is great. Now the average person has some really wonderful technology. But for those who want to do unique and wild things, like, for example, the spiral trend, right, with the control net spirals, you know, I think that that is something where the artist will always be wanting further access to kind of the controls of things.
Did you want
so that won't go away. People have fun with it, you know?
Yeah. Did you want to show Foocus quickly? Because I've never seen it.
Okay, we got it there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is what's interesting is it just starts like, this is from Run Diffusion, you know, this stuff. But this is what you get. So this is the application itself. This is just the Run Diffusion iframe, but it's really just picture prompt, the simplest of interfaces. So, you know, if we put in beautiful landscape photograph of the Irish hills, what should we make specific about it with a eclipse? Hit generate. And so there's really not much to this. It's just the image and the prompt. It's
There's no sliders.
Yep. And I actually like how the image comes in. It's kind of like really, really crisp and interesting to see that diffusion process happen.
Yeah, I think sometimes being able to see a bit of the steps as it goes through them helps also to understand how to tweak your prompt. In prompting in Stable Diffusion, you can manipulate the steps. Like you can say, draw this only from step 1. If you have, let's say, 30 steps, you can say, draw this only from step 1 to 10, and then from step 10 to 20, draw something else. And you can use it to manipulate the end result. So being able to see the steps like this could be useful actually in manipulating your prompt further and getting better results.
Well, that's beyond this though, right? This is super basic. So, you know, that's an automatic thing. This just gets good results right away. You see, we got kind of funny little Irish hills there. It thinks it's
Look
something.
at the watermark.
Yeah. So, but if you want, you can go a little bit deeper. So you hit this advanced button, and then you get, you know, speed and quality is really it. How many images you want, negative prompt there. But if you click the style tab, So
Uh-huh.
you'll see right now the default is slightly cinematic. And if you want, you can really use hundreds of styles. And what's interesting about these styles is they are essentially prompt additions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're going to take what we have here and then add different modifiers to it. So
Yeah.
if we do abstract expressionism,
There's a similar plugin for Automatic called Style
yeah,
Something that
it
is.
uses the styles, yeah. And the creator of ControlNet made this application, so it's really slick. There's a lot of interesting tricks under the hood, like with samplers and steps and all that stuff that they've added in to make this produce great results.
Yeah, I think this
Um,
is this is definitely a step toward less prompting, because I can see this evolving into you don't even have anymore the text box, and you just have like you select predefined stuff based on how the model was trained, maybe.
but then you can like combine them, which is pretty
Yeah.
funny. Like, what happens if we add disco uh, paper cut collage? We'll see what happens. Yeah, so I think like there is sort of something happening where there's a lot of like developer focused people that are making these AI applications, and they basically have a new sort of realm that they have to explore of like making these human artists a good interface. And this is what the ControlNet one, aspires to do. I think when some people step into like automatic and stuff, they're overwhelmed by all the settings and like different sliders and things, and they can very easily get off track and get a gutter ball of a generation of just like a really bad generation and be like, oh, this sucks. But here, this is easy.
What do you think is the incentive for wanting less prompting? Like right now, is it the complexity of prompting, or what's the need? Like, why are people so interested in removing prompting from the work, from this kind of workflows?
Well, I think the interesting thing is kind of what we talked about at the start, where you've got these like blind men and the elephant, right? Is like we don't know the weights in the model. We don't know what it's been trained on for caption wise unless we ourselves created it. We don't know these overtrained and undertrained areas except by bumping into them while we're prompting. And so it
Mm.
will remove a lot of this trial and error.
Oh, that's true.
Um,
Yeah.
you see this a little bit happening with like Midjourney. Like there's some theories. Midjourney is like ChatGPT, right? Like we don't know what's going on under the hood
Yeah.
necessarily, but we can theorize. And the discussion there is that there's a lot of like prompt engineering that happens after you put the prompt in to make
Yeah.
the image in a certain
Yeah.
way, right?
I am
Um,
positive that that's the case. Like, I'm sure that when you prompt something into Midjourney will take it and change your prompt according to how the model was trained, and it probably has like a bunch of different models under the hood that it
mhm.
selects according to your prompt. Like if it thinks that your prompt necessitates a specific style, it's gonna pull up a model that has a specific style, which is also what is apparently happening with ChatGPT. I wrote an article today about this topic, that there's basically rumors that ChatGPT is not one model but is 8 models that
Mhm.
then also are directed by 16 different inference models.
Yeah.
So, and each every time you prompt something, basically ChatGPT selects a solution, so a model package that is the most suited for your prompt, and gives you a result. So for sure,
Mhm.
Midjourney has something like that under the hood.
In regards to just like getting better at prompting, like it is a method of mapping that space. And I think that that's something that that there's a lot of work to be done in education in that space of teaching people how to prompt. Now you have people going out getting jobs as prompt engineers, right, who are just figuring it out, and it's just trial and error. So as we move into like a future space, we will have AI that trains us how to use AI. We will have AI educators teaching us how to use AI because they're just better at it. We still are better at ideas for now, And maybe once that idea threshold is passed, that'll be the singularity, and all of a sudden AI will start doing its own thing, right? But for now,
that should be the
yeah.
AGI. When the AI starts having ideas of its own that are truly original, I guess that's probably the point where you have artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, so we've had a really interesting high-level discussion just about prompting. What is the future of prompting? Where is prompting going? Is prompting going to disappear? Hopefully we left you with some real curiosity about where things are going, some interesting questions to pursue. The industry's moving so fast that this future of promptlessness could be here faster than we even know. But there is a very practical need for prompting today. So in the next episode, we'll be going over, the high level or the actual practical applications of prompting, breaking down specific prompts, how they work, techniques for prompting for both Stable Diffusion and ChatGPT.
Yeah, this was super interesting for me. You brought some topics that really opened my mind and like really food for thought on the future of prompting. It was super interesting, and I'm curious to see like how it's going to actually evolve. I'm sure like the end result is going to be different from what we both expect. But yeah, it was definitely food for thought, and also food for thought for practical applications, in software development and prompting in general. Thinking about the future of prompting definitely gives you tools to understand and appreciate more the practical prompting you do on a day-to-day basis. So thank you very much, Ed.
Oh, thank you. It was great. Great discussion. Lots of topics to uncover. I feel like we could go for like another hour. But we will do in the part 2, we'll be talking about the elephant in the room. We'll go over prompting and discuss the practicalities of it, what works, what doesn't. So stay tuned. This is AI Unplugged. I'm Ed.
I'm Alex. Thank you very much for watching.
Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Cheers. Bye.